So back in the day, I used to love watching old movies with my dad, and one of my favorites was Angels with Dirty Faces. Now, if you remember, back in the day, there was no remote. Actually, let me take that back. I was the remote. The kids would sit on the floor. My dad get home from work. He'd be on the couch. He'd be like, "Hey, Robbie, turn channel 7 on for me." That's when we had like 3 channels to choose from before cable was invented. So James Cagney I used to love. If you're not familiar with James Cagney, he's the guy who's famous for saying, "You dirty rat, you killed my brother." Or if you remember that show from the 70s, Willard, where the guy was in love with a rat, and he said to his brother, "You dirty brother, you killed my rat." Remember Michael Jackson had the theme song, "Ben, a beautiful love song to a rat." Yeah, so that was Willard, I believe, was the name of that movie. But getting back with Angels with Dirty Faces is about these street kids in New York. And the premise was that these were basically good kids who had a bad break and they got in trouble. So they were angels with dirty faces. And if I recall, that was the movie where James Cagney was given the death sentence. And if my memory serves me right, I should have maybe looked it up. I think a Catholic priest went to him and asked him to do something for the kids. He said, "I know you're a brave man, and you're going to go there, and you're not gonna cry. You're gonna die like a man, and these kids are gonna see you as a hero. But if you go in there and act like you're scared, maybe you'll save some kids from a life of crime." And at first he resisted, and then he thought about the kids, and his goodness came through, and he's like, "Oh no, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And the newspaper read, "Yellow Belly, the gangster, cries like a baby at the electric chair." And so gave kids pause of thought. So, like I said, the premise of the movies were they were basically good kids with dirty faces. And aren't we all, When I was a Protestant, I would have rejected that premise because as a Protestant, I believe the doctrine of total depravity. There's absolutely no good left in you. We were born in a sin nature, and there's no taking away. Baptism didn't take it away. Confession didn't take it away. You had that sin nature. And basically, the teaching of Martin Luther was forensic justification, where, Jesus covers you. You're just a pile of dung, and Jesus covers you with a white sheet. So when the Father looks at you, he doesn't see the dung, the sin. He sees the white sheet of Jesus, and you're forgiven. And Catholics, we believe in forensic justification, but we also believe that we're made in the image of God. And although we have original sin that gives us the propensity to sin, the sin nature to want to sin, when we're baptized, we are cleansed, and we are as white as snow. When Jesus sees us, he sees us white as snow. And then as we sin and have unconfessed sin stain us, there's stains, and our faces get dirty, and confession cleans us. And this is, we have to work out our own salvation. St. Paul describes it as a race. It's like a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a fight. And we'll battle with sin our whole lives, So the doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is way more biblical and is what the church has taught for 2,000 years, is that even though we're full of sin, deep down inside, there's some good in us, Not like the New Agers say, we're all good, No, there's sin. We're sinful, rebellious people, but we're still made in the image of God, and there's a part of us that wants to do right. St. Paul described it as, things I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, I do, But we wouldn't even want to do good if it wasn't for the Holy Spirit and it wasn't for us being created in the image of God. But, I told you this a while back. My granddaughter, she was born with a terminal illness, and at age 4, she died. And I remember at the funeral, everyone telling me when they met her, they felt a presence. And this is true. I felt it. There was a presence about her, just a holy sacredness. She was disabled where she couldn't. 4 years old, she was like a newborn. But there was a presence of God with her that was so unmistakable that even an atheist relative told my daughter-in-law he felt like she was an angel. And I told him, No, she was created much higher than the angels. You see, the Bible says we are created higher than the angels. Although the angels are powerful and awesome, and I'm so thankful that we say the St. Michael the Archangel prayer every day after Mass. They are subservient to us. St. Paul tells us we're going to judge the angels one day. They're below us. So it's nice to know that there's saints of old with dirty faces. And what do I mean by that? Well, Jesus was perfect. He was sinless. He never sinned. Yet he got dirty. He chose to come to earth and be a carpenter, a blue-collar guy. And, I work a blue-collar guy, deliver milk, and all day I'm grabbing crates of milk, pulling, pushing, lifting, climbing up and down the truck, and I'm getting grime and filth all over my hands. And, I'm touching my face, not knowing, by the time I come home, I got a dirty face, Before these videos, I try to look somewhat presentable, and I usually shower and shave. But if you see me after a 14-hour day slinging milk, you'd see a grimy guy with bags under his eyes, unshaven, and not very pleasant to look at or smell. I smell like milk. So, Jesus sweat in the hot Middle Eastern sun, hammering nails. It's a very hard job. I've done some carpentry work in the past. I'm not really a detail-oriented person, so it never went that well. But I know what it's like to work in the sun and hammer nails. And it's hard physically, and you sweat, and you get dirty, And you see, he wouldn't mind to get down in the dirt, when, after his ascension, and he met the apostles at the shore, and he told them where the fish were. Said he cooked them breakfast. He cooked them, physically cooked them breakfast. He got his hands dirty and actually cooked for the guys. Hey guys, come on, let me make some breakfast. Here's some fish, some bread I made for you. You see, when the tax collector came to get taxes, Peter's like, hey, we got to pay this guy our taxes. I got no money. So obviously they weren't living high on the hog like these mega pastors living in mansions. They were living outside. They were homeless, And Jesus told Peter, go cast your net, and when you pull the fish up, take out the coin and pay my tax and your tax. And voila, I was there. So he lived outside and in the dirt. They slept in the dirt. And not only that, he wasn't afraid to let dirty sinners touch him. It said the Pharisees, the legalists, were so upset that he would eat with sinners. And in fact, when he was in the Pharisee's house, a prostitute came in, dressed all scantily, scandalously, and she touched him with her hands and washed his feet with her perfume, and then dried his feet with her hair. And the Pharisees were scandalized. But Jesus said that she did what was right, and they did it. The Gospels record St. John, the Apostle John, leaning up on Jesus during the Last Supper. So he leaned on his breast, just hanging out. He wasn't afraid to touch us, to be with us, to get dirty. And you see the saints, St. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He starts off a little boastful. You could tell like he's kind of embarrassed that he has to boast, because St. Paul was a very humble man of God. And humility is a funny thing. I think I've told you the story. I once got a medal for being humble, but they took it away because I wore it. You see, once you admit you're humble, you're no longer humble. But sometimes you have to remind people who you are to remind them who they are. And St. Paul reminds the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 that when he came to them, he didn't come with fancy words. He came to them preaching Christ crucified. He could have taken money from them, but he didn't ask for money. He made money building tents and selling tents. He was shipwrecked, he reminded them. He was homeless, he reminded them. He was beaten by the rod 13 times, I believe it says. And he was telling them this because they were listening to these grifters that came in, giving them a different gospel and getting money from them, So St. Paul was dirty. He worked with his hands. He was a tent maker. He was homeless. And then he spent the last part of his life in jail. And there's 5 very positive gospels. escape me. I know Philippians is one. We can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. He wrote those those letters rather, while he was in prison. The most positive letters are actually known as the positive letters of St. Paul. He wrote them while he was in prison. You know, filthy. I don't think they let you take showers there. And you see it even after him, you know, through the church. You know, I love the story of Deacon Lawrence. I've told it here several times. I'll say it as quick as I can here for those who don't remember it. In 258 AD, Emperor Valerian put out an edict that the Pope will be killed on sight. All his bishops, priests, and deacons will also be killed. And so Pope Sixtus said, listen, I'm going to be killed, you know. You're all going to be killed. He tells the deacons, and he tells Deacon Lawrence, you're the treasurer. Take all the treasure and give it to the poor before he kills you. So Deacon Lawrence does that. So they come and kill Pope Sixtus. And by the way, you know, the church was illegal for the first 325 years. So they all lived a very uncomfortable life. They all had dirty faces. You know, I think out of the first 32 popes, 30 of them were martyred for the faith. This is historical. This is real. This is our faith. And so Deacon Lawrence gives all the money to the poor. And then like a prelate, I guess you call it, from Emperor Valerian says, hey, I hear you're the treasurer. Now I just killed the Pope, killed all the other deacons. We're going to kill you, but we'll give you a painless death if you give us all the treasure. If not, we're going to torture you pretty badly. And he's like, cool. The church has a lot of treasure. Give me a couple days to gather it. So the prelate says, you got 2 days. So 2 days later, Deacon Lawrence walks in. And the prelate says, hey, where's the treasure of the church? And Deacon Lawrence rips open the door. And hundreds of the poor, the lame, the deaf, mute, and blind, the misfits of society come walking in filthy with dirty faces and rags. And Deacon Lawrence says, this is the treasure of the church. And the church is much richer than Caesar. And then he was thrown on the rock and burned alive. But it wasn't just the average person who had dirty faces. When Christianity was finally legalized, because imagine, up to like 325 AD, Christianity was illegal, just in the same way as in some Muslim countries, homosexuality is illegal, and they'll kill you just for being a homosexual. They'll torture you and kill you just for being a homosexual. Well, the whole world would kill you. In the whole world, it was illegal to be a Christian. You would get tortured and killed for being a Christian, or tortured and let go to warn others. Look. And so at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, Constantine legalized. He didn't make it the official religion. He still allowed all the religions, but he legalized Christianity. He said, okay, we'll legalize Christianity. But there was a dispute amongst some of the people. Some of the people were following this priest Arius, who said the Trinity wasn't true. And so Constantine said, listen, you bishops need to get together and decide on this, because I can't have a division in my kingdom. So all the bishops from around the world came to the Council of Nicaea. And I think it's the historian Eusebius. I'm not sure which historian, but one of the historians back then writes about what he's seen. And he said these bishops would come in, many of them with only one eye, because one eye was poked out while they were being tortured. Many with one arm, many with one leg. It looked like they were coming from the Iraq War. They were coming injured, with dirty faces and rags and ripped up clothes. You know, I've heard that, and I believe it, because I was an evangelical for 30 years. Jeff Furtick, pastor of a mega church, he pays like $2,500 for these jeans he wears, and they come with rips already in it. Yeah, this is like true stuff. These bishops at Nicaea had ripped clothes that they paid for with their blood and their sweat and their faith. Just to put things in perspective, they all had dirty faces. And these saints with dirty faces, one eyes and one arm, they stood up for the true apostolic faith. And they said, no, the Trinity is true. Jesus Christ is consubstantial with the Father, because they were saying he was less than the Father. Consubstantial meaning equal. So you see these saints throughout church history, dirty faces, preaching the gospel. And like I said, I come to hear you all clean, preaching you guys, but every day we're called to give an account of the faith that lies within us. And like I said, most day I'm ragged looking with bags on my eyes, unshaven, dirty, not the best looking guy to look at. But I'm ready by the grace of God to give an account, and it's nice to know that these saints weren't all pretty boys, like Joel Osteen and all these fancy guys up there, these saints of old that won the world for Christ. I mean, they took a pagan world and made it Christian within a few hundred years. They did it with dirty faces. And so Jesus is our perfect example, and the saints are perfect examples of imperfect men and women. Men and women who were sinners. Jesus had people following that were prostitutes and the thieves and murderers. The apostles, they saved prostitutes, thieves, and murderers. And you see that throughout church history. And, you even see, if you look at the life of Pope Francis, they say he was, in Argentina, he was known as the priest to the slums. And then when he became cardinal, he still went into the slums and preached and recruited priests to go into the slums. And they were called the slum priests. They should make a movie about that, the slum priests. I think that'd be a pretty powerful movie. But they said Pope Francis, when he was a priest, the kind of people, he didn't minister to, all these righteous Catholics. No, he went into the slums and ministered to people that Jesus would minister to. Like Mother Teresa would minister to. He would accompany pregnant drug addict women to the hospital to get help. Orphans, he would try and find homes for. Drug addicts, mothers who were losing their mind because their kids were addicted to drugs that the cartels were giving them for free to get them hooked so they could work for them and do other illegal activity. I mean, he was in the real world. He wasn't on YouTube preaching this idealistic Catholic world. Pope Francis was there, just like Jesus was there, just like St. Paul was there, just like St. Athanasius was there in the fight. And then when he became Pope, there was a palace given to him, to the Vatican, by a rich heiress. And the plans were to rent these rooms, renovate it and rent these rooms out for lots of money. Pope Francis says, no, you got the first part right. We're going to renovate it. But the second part, you got wrong. We're going to make it a palace for the homeless. And he made this beautiful palace, a place of beauty with expensive art, where a homeless person could come in and enjoy the art and the beauty of God, of God's creation. And they can stay in a palace suite and eat, servants serving them food. And Pope Francis, my Protestant friends will say, well, yeah, he lives like a king. Well, he could have lived in a very nice palace, but he chose to live in the servants' quarters, very small quarters he chose to live in. And I always get people saying, can you ever say a negative word about your church? People, even Catholics, get mad at me like, Rob, you got your head buried in the sand. There's a crisis going on. There's always a crisis. You notice these YouTubers are like CNN. Every day, when Trump was president, every day there was a crisis about Trump. It was just fabricated and exaggerated and crazy. And you see that with Pope Francis. No matter what happens, every day you go on YouTube and you can find someone pulling their hair out. We're in a crisis. And so I'm going to give you a criticism that I've had when I was a Protestant and I still have now. When I seen how these cardinals and bishops live, they live in like some nice freaking places. So even cardinals I loved, I loved Cardinal Pell. I used to, a few times I got to hear him on YouTube, and I was really praying that somehow I could get him, to interview him. And there was one slight chance because I knew someone who knew him, but he passed away, and I'm sure he's in heaven today, is my guess. But anyway, even him, he had like a 6,500 square foot apartment. That's like 5 times the size of my house. And they live, whether you consider them conservative or liberal, I consider them either orthodox or heterodox. But if you want to label them like the world labels conservative and liberal, it crosses party lines. They all live like princes, and that's what we call them, princes. So, I guess there's a reason why the church does that. I mean, we're thankful for our bishops, we're thankful for our cardinals, and we want to bless them. But that's not how Jesus and the apostles lived. That's not how Pope Francis lived. That's not how the saints of old lived, you know? So yeah, so that's kind of a negative thing that I think is having these cardinals. And, you know, Pope Francis, you know, says, you know, you gotta smell like the sheep, you know? Like I smell like the milk by the end of the day. And I smell like the milkmen who I share the gospel with, you know? Or I sweat and I smell like the carpenter friends of mine that sweat and stink, you know? We got to smell like the sheep, man. And so that would be a criticism, but, you know, I'm not the judge of the church, you know? So that's the way it is. So I thought it was kind of interesting when Pope Francis disciplined Cardinal Burke and said, we're not going to pay for your 5,000 square foot apartment anymore. And, you know, people were upset. And personally, I like Cardinal Burke. I'm disappointed in the things he wrote thing about the Pope. But I remember way back, first time hearing him, someone asked him straight up, is the SSPX still in schism since Pope Francis allowed their priests to give confessions? And he said, well, you know, Pope Francis did that out of mercy. You know, I've never seen this before. You know, basically, Pope Francis is one of a kind. He has such mercy for the faithful that go to SSPX. He allowed the priests to hear confessions. He said, but they're still in schism. He said straight out, the Cardinal Burke said the SSPX has been in schism ever since their founder excommunicated Marcel Lefebvre, disobeyed Pope St. John Paul II. And got a lot of SPX guys upset because they kind of like Cardinal Burke. But Cardinal Burke is a brilliant canon lawyer. I think he's like the highest ranking canon lawyer. So he knows, like that's, boom, that settled it, you know. That'd be like the Supreme Court justice almost. You know, laws of the church, they're in schism. And if you're not familiar with the SSPX, basically this excommunicated Catholic, Marcel Lefebvre, started this group, and they're basically cafeteria Catholics. They go through the cafeteria and they say, oh, we don't like Vatican II. So like the old Catholics who rejected Vatican I, and they still are holding out for us to change Vatican I, these SSPX guys think Vatican II is, they don't have to obey it, and they're holding out that we're going to change Vatican II one day. Then they go down the line a little bit further, like, oh, this new mass that like 95% of us go to every day. We don't like that. So they leave that. And they're still holding out hope that we're going to change the new mass that we've had for over 65 years. That has brought a resurgence and growth in the church, like the early church, because it's a missionary mass. It's an evangelistic mass. We're evangelizing the masses in addition to worshiping the sacrifice of Christ. So that's a little history on the SSPX. But my point is, Cardinal Burke seems like he really loves the Lord and he's got the joy of the Lord. And every time I see him, he's just a likable guy. And when he got COVID a few years ago, normally when they put people on a ventilator, I know that's like a death sentence. Like that was like the worst idea, whoever thought of that. But when I heard Cardinal Burke was on the ventilator and I prayed for him, I felt like a strong peace. And I even told someone who sent me a text, hey, pray for Cardinal Burke. He's on the ventilator. I'm like, I think he's going to pull through this. You know, it's like I don't know why, but I felt led to keep praying for him afterwards. I think he's a godly man. I believe he's a guy I don't know him personally, but I believe he's a godly man. And why would he criticize Pope Francis so much? I think sometimes people get, he's a super smart, intellectual guy. I think sometimes people get so intellectual and, you know, so much into canon law, you know, they miss the heart of the law, which is mercy and love. And they mistake love for something unorthodox. Like, maybe I'm explaining this poorly, but sometimes they get stuck on the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. So he's been criticizing Pope Francis unfairly, in my view, for a while now. And Pope Francis is just kind of letting it go. But recently, he published on his website a dubio where he asked Pope Francis straight up, will the church allow blessings of same-sex unions? And then he published the answer saying, if a gay man comes for a blessing, he's looking to get better. We cannot deny someone who's looking to get better. And everyone's like, wow, looks like he's opening the door for same-sex unions. But then the next day, something happened that changed everything. So first off, Cardinal Burke sent the letter privately to Pope Francis, which is the right thing to do. Pope Francis answered him privately. So none of us should really know about this, honestly. And if there wasn't YouTube and social media, we probably wouldn't. So he writes this letter privately, gets a response privately the next day, and then he publishes part of the answer, which I don't understand why he did it. I think that was unfair to Pope Francis, because what I just said sounded like, might be a door opening for blessed same-sex unions. So the next day, the Vatican released the whole response, which basically said, no, the church cannot bless same-sex unions because God cannot bless sin. We cannot bless anything that even resembles a same-sex union. However, if someone, individual, one person in a same-sex union comes to a priest looking for a blessing, looking to better himself, yes, we can't deny him. We need to bring him into the church, bring him to confession, not push him out of the church. It changes everything. It changes everything. So there were other things like that, but that's probably the latest, in my opinion, because Pope Francis didn't tell us. And then people say, well, he did it to embarrass and humiliate Cardinal Burke. He disciplined him by taking away his free rent. He could stay there, but he's going to have to pay rent. He did that to embarrass the cardinal. Well, Pope Francis kept this private. The only time it came public was when people on YouTube started lying about it and saying Pope Francis called Cardinal Burke his enemy. So Pope Francis had to go public and say, no, he's not my enemy. I've never called him my enemy. And Cardinal Burke said, I don't think Pope Francis thinks I'm his enemy, and I'm not his enemy. I'm just trying to... basically, Cardinal Burke said, I'm trying to do my job and show him canon law. But in the past, if you look at the history of popes, they would have excommunicated Cardinal Burke for a lot less than what he's done. I mean, these critics that are constantly criticizing the Pope, this was never tolerated. Pope Francis is very tolerant of these criticisms. And, just like the left uses tactics, they say the opposite of what's really happening. I'm hearing a lot of YouTubers saying Pope Francis is a tyrant and a dictator. If he was a tyrant and a dictator, there'd be a whole bunch of YouTubers excommunicated, and there'd be a whole bunch of bishops and priests excommunicated. So I think Pope Francis did this as a discipline measure that I thought he thinks would be good for the cardinal. Sometimes it's good for us to live humbly, especially, you're a cardinal, you're an example to us. I don't know, again, I honestly, and I say this with every bit of my fiber, that I honestly don't believe Cardinal Burke did this as an evil way to hurt Pope Francis. And I don't think Pope Francis did this as a vengeful, evil way either. I think they both said what they meant and meant what they said for the good of each other, the good of us, the church, and the good of the kingdom of heaven. I honestly believe that. But Pope Francis is the boss. So he gets the last say. Canon 1404. The Holy See is judged by no one. So don't start making judgments, because you're putting your soul in jeopardy here if you are. And I don't think Cardinal Burke is judging Pope Francis. He's questioning him, but he's putting these questions in a way that's causing division. And the important job of a pope is to keep us united, to keep us together. And the devil in these last days is just using so many people to scandalize the church, to trash talk the Pope, lie about the Pope every day on YouTube, and take things out of context. And then to have a respected cardinal who, like I said, I respect and I love and I pray for, to have him kind of add to it with these questions. Pope Francis felt he needed to be disciplined. And it wasn't that harsh. He's living like that retired. I don't even see myself retiring. Honestly, I see myself working till the day I die. And many blue collar guys like me are in the same boat. You know, never mind living in a 5,000 square foot flat with servants. Come on. It wasn't that harsh. Just maybe it made him a little humble. And I'm sure Pope Francis prayed about it, and he didn't do it quick. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, you know, questioning the Pope, criticizing the Pope. So whether you agree with me or not, you know, if you're a Catholic, we have to be obedient to the Pope. We have to be. Because then if we're not, then we're no different than Protestants, you know? And I love my Protestant brothers, but I'm Catholic because I'm not Protestant. I believe they're in error when it comes to the Pope, you know? And I have Protestants call me Papist and Popish, and I have Catholics calling me Pope-splainer. It's all the same. They're all calling me names because I defend the Pope, and I'm Catholic. How ironic is that? If you don't think we're in the last days, think about that. If you're a Catholic on YouTube and you defend the Pope, you'll get criticized by more Catholics than if you're a Catholic on YouTube and bash the Pope. You'll get praised by more Catholics. This is crazy, man. And, you know, thank God I don't do this for a living because I'd be broke. I'd be home. I'd never mind living in a 5,000 square foot flat. I'd be homeless. So there you have it. My take on Cardinal Burke, Pope Francis, and saints with dirty faces. God bless and stay Catholic.